Okay, well, welcome back, everybody, and we're coming toward the end of the course. We have a couple weeks left, and in a second here, I'll explain how we're going to wrap up the course and what our schedule is going to be. But this week, I want to kind of come back in some ways to where we started. The first week or so of the course, we talked about the dreadful way that people that work in private security are sometimes portrayed in film and in the media, and how they're thought of by the general public and how they're thought of by law enforcement, especially because the two should be working hand in hand on many things. And it was pretty abysmal. It's pretty depressing for somebody like me who spent a 40-year career working in the field, although I will say that I enjoyed much better relationships with most people and a professional relationship with law enforcement, simply because I had a higher level position and I am who I am, and I'm just not going to let people not like me. So, I forced myself on them just to the point where they were like, okay, well, we'll let you play in the sandbox. So, but it really is abysmal, and part of it is the professionalism that the industry is asked to have. And as you can think about it, if I say that you need to have a medical degree to be a doctor, getting a medical degree is a hard thing. According to Harvard, the only thing harder than a medical degree is a PhD or an EDD. And I will tell you that wasn't that hard. I think a medical degree is much harder. But if I told you that you could be a doctor just by saying, yeah, I think I'm going to be a doctor, and you could, hang a sign out in front of your house saying, appointments taken, and we accept your insurance, then how professional would you think the medical community would be, and what kind of confidence would you have that they could do what you asked them to do? And the answer is very little, and we all know that, right? Once you deprofessionalize anything, then people have less confidence in it. And what I'd like to talk about this week primarily are the legal reasons why security has such a poor reputation. And then when we get back together, I want to have a very robust discussion. And I'm going to ask you guys to be more loud and animated than you've been before in my classroom, because I really want to take your problem-solving skills that you have displayed over the course of the semester, which have been very impressive, and let's work on the big problem. And the big problem is that the industry can't solve all of these other issues if not allowed to, and if people don't have the confidence in their ability to do so. So that's kind of where we're going to go this week. But before we jump into that lively lecture, let's talk about the next few weeks. So this week, there's only the lecture. There is nothing else that I'm going to ask you to do. Now, I saw a couple of you, I got this, these magic glasses, and I saw a couple of you reach for the stop button. As soon as I said that, whoa, slow down, slow your roll, because you will need this information in order to participate in our discussion on Monday, and that will also be graded as your other exercises have been. We're just going to do it a little differently. But please, this is going to hopefully be not too long and give you the information you need to be successful come Monday. Now, when we get back together, that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to actually talk about how the future of private security has to change and how it may impact you as an end user, even if you don't go into the field or have nothing to do with the field. So we're also, when we get back together, going to do a quick recap of the semester, right? Just to walk down memory lane. It's going to take us probably half of one of the classes. And then on Friday, the Friday before finals week, we will have a working session. It is non-mandatory. Okay, so you don't need to be there the Friday before finals week. However, during that class session, you will do nothing but work on your final paper. And during that class, I will be available for pre-reads and give tips and tricks on how to do well on the final paper. I would strongly suggest that people who come to that session will do well on their final paper, and those that don't will be a little bit lost. But after that Friday class, if you were in the Friday class, I will answer your questions gladly. But if you didn't come to the Friday class the week before finals, then the final paper is up to you. And if you bomb it, you get something wrong, you don't follow the instructions, too bad, so sad. Okay, and it's going to reflect on you. So it's up to you. Let your conscience be your guide, but that Friday is not mandatory. On Wednesday, May 7th, that is the following week. That is finals week. We must meet with students during the final exam time. That is not an option at the university. So, therefore, on the 7th of May at 1 to 3 p.m. is our scheduled time for a final exam. Sometime between 1 and 3 p.m. on May 7th, you individually must bring the cover page, and a cover page is required, and I'll tell you what's required on it. The cover page from your final paper printed to me in the classroom. That is your ticket for admission. You just need to bring the cover page. By then, you'll have already submitted your paper, the rest of it, in D2L. But if you don't come and bring me the cover page, then you did not show for the final exam, and I cannot grade your paper as a final exam, and therefore it is a 0. So unless there is some circumstance where you are basically unable physically to come because of a serious reason, not I cut out early so I could go home, my finals were done, and Tuesday, and I left and went home. Sorry, Charlie, you have to wait till Wednesday, 1 to 3. So if anybody's not clear on that, ask me next week when we're in session together, because I need to see your smiling face on the 7th with the cover sheet from your paper in your hand, and that's how I'm going to prove that you showed, should we be audited by the dean. So most of you have probably taken some form of a law or civics class, I'm sure, at least in high school, but the sources of law are kind of important to us when we do a review of private security and its professionalism. And if we look at the sources of law, they are pretty straightforward, and most of you are probably familiar with them all in some form. And federal and state laws, they're formed by a constitution or legislative sources. So essentially, you have a state constitution, we have our federal constitution. There are certain laws that are listed right in there, right? The law says you have the freedom of speech. There's the freedom of the press. The law says you must do certain things, and the government must do certain things, and that is indeed enforceable law. State legislatures and the federal Congress can also make laws. That is their job, to make laws. And when those laws get the signature of the chief executive, be it the president or a governor, they also then become enforceable law in that state, territory, or country. There is another way that a law can really come about, and that is case law. So a court may interpret the laws that are made by these legislatures. So, for instance, and I use this example again later because it's a pretty good one, I think, there is a speed limit of 70 miles an hour on turnpikes, generally. And a person may get a ticket for going 90 on that turnpike. And when they go to court, they tell the court, look, I had a person in the back of my car that was about to deliver a baby, right? There was a pregnant woman in the back of my car. She was about to have a baby. I was going 90 so I could get her to the hospital because I was afraid that if I didn't, she and the baby would suffer irreparable harm. And the court may say, in that event, I am not going to give you a punishment at all, and I'm going to dismiss the charges because I believe that when someone's life is in danger, the speed limit law takes backseat. No pun intended, right? In that case, case law has said that it is okay to go faster than the speed limit in the event of a medical emergency to save the life or protect the life of another. So that's pretty easy to do, right? I mean, we see that all the time. The law is interpreted, and that case law now becomes the way we interpret that law. Now, executive orders have become a really big thing. You probably didn't hear much about them. Every president signs them, as do chief executives. They may be empowered to sign into law certain rules and regulations without going to legislative action. So there are certain things in each state constitution or U.S. Constitution that are rights, responsibilities, and privileges of the chief executive. And they may use that right, privilege, to enact law. A president signs an executive order. Now, generally speaking, when a president signs an executive order, it takes effect and immediately a court gets involved to interpret that executive order to make sure, A, that it is in line with the rights and responsibilities granted to the chief executive, and number two, that it is indeed does not contradict some other law with more force, right? So executive orders are generally not used a lot. However, we have seen them a lot used in this current administration and the administration before. So they are getting more play. Now, finally, we have administrative law, and people just don't even think about administrative law much because, every civics class taught you when you want to make a law, you have to go to the legislature, and then the two houses of a bicameral legislature will pass this. Then they will send it to the governor or the president. The president signs it, and it becomes law. Simple, easy stuff. But those laws don't really say what to do. They tell you what you can do and what you cannot do in very high-level terms. But at that point, they are turned over to an administrative body or a department. And that department then creates rules and regulations that really are the nuts and bolts and impact how we act as citizens. That is known as regulatory law. Now, regulatory law defines, this is a ABA, the American Bar Association's definition. Regulatory law defines the powers, responsibilities, rights, and procedures that direct, guide, empower, and constrain the actors and agencies that have a stake in regulatory outcomes. Whew, that's a mouthful. Basically, what it deals with, though, are the nuts and bolts directions on how a law is to be implemented. And we have a lot of examples of that are just really easy to put it into context. So we'll go back to our speed limit again. State sets a statewide speed limit, 70 miles an hour. I believe that is the speed limit in Pennsylvania, but again, as not being a Pennsylvanian and somebody who drives 50 miles an hour on the turnpike, I'm that little old man that you flip off and I wave back. Yeah, that's me. But I think there's a statewide speed limit of 70 miles an hour. Now, does that mean every road is 70 miles an hour? Of course not. Try doing 70 down Main Street in Slippery Rock. First of all, you can't because the traffic is terrible on that little bird because of the university. But nonetheless, every road is not 70. A local regulatory body, a department, sets reasonable limits. So they say 25 miles an hour in a school zone, 20 in a residential zone, 55 on a rural highway perhaps, right? And they don't even go to the point of a town council or someone saying, okay, they may say, all right, we're going to make the school zone 20 miles an hour in town. It's a major road, so we can't really take it down to 10 or 15, but 20 miles an hour seems reasonable on that road at all times, and please make it so. And someone from the Roads and Grounds Department goes out and determines where those signs go up, where that speed limit starts and stops. It's generally not, in that little edict that a town council, the state says there's a 70 mile an hour speed limit. The town council says, wait a minute, that's not going to work in front of our elementary school. And so they say it's 20 miles an hour in front of the elementary school. And some department head determines what the front of the elementary school is. How far back does that go? Where does that sign actually go and start? Because that's the part where it can be enforced. You were going 35 miles an hour when you hit that 20 mile an hour zone where that sign was. That sign was put up by somebody who made a decision and made it administrative law that is the line right there. And it really is done by a department. And that department could, that could say, well, we're going to change it to 2 miles an hour, or as town council could, right? We'll make the speed limit in Slippery Rock 2 miles an hour. We're guaranteed then that no student is going to get hit while they're crossing the street, because there's a lot of students crossing the street to go to their apartments and such. Now, someone would challenge that, and we know it. But they certainly could set it and see if the court would overturn them. Administrative law, those regulatory agencies, those smaller town and city councils, and then the agencies like the roads and grounds crews have an amazing amount of power to actually implement the laws once they are passed. So, how does this affect you? Does it have any impact on you? Do you really care? Well, you should. So the state university budget is approved by the PA legislature every year. In fact, the chancellor of the university is going to ask for 6.5% more money to support the state university system next year. And the state legislature gives a certain amount of money. Once they pass the budget, right, it becomes law that they will indeed give X number of millions of dollars to the state system of education, which is the 13 state colleges, not counting Penn State and their affiliates or private schools, but just the 13 PASHE schools, as they're called, the ones that we play football against. How's that? And that money gets distributed. Now, the money that they get doesn't quite pay for everything, and therefore you have to pay something called tuition. I'm sure you've heard of it, right? And you make up the budget shortfall. If you pay your tuition late, the university will charge you something for that, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a late charge, right? But the state legislature, when they gave that money, they never said, well, we're going to give you this money, but you also have to charge late fees. The university makes that decision based on their financial constraints. If the university may, in their defense, use money from reserved funds that would normally get interest, and since they're using them to pay your bills because you haven't paid them yet, they're losing that interest money. Those late fees make some of it back. I know it sounds like a cheap excuse, but there is a reason for late fees within reason, because that money could have been working to do other things in an endowment or in an investment account. But the university system makes those rules. There is nothing in state law that says that the university can charge $25 for a parking ticket, or whatever they charge. Let's say it's $25. I don't get parking tickets. Let's say it's $25 for a parking ticket. There's nothing in the law. It says that police departments and cities, municipalities, and universities may charge a reasonable fee for parking violations, for violations of their ordinances. That's all it says. It doesn't set that number. There's nothing in the state law that says that. An administrative policy was set that this is the number they're going to charge, and they use that money to pay for maintenance on parking lots and pay in the police department and other things, right? And also as a punitive damage to make sure that you don't park badly. Now, the federal government says we have to pay income tax. Where does it say that? It says it in the 16th Amendment of the United States, that the federal government may levy a tax on incomes, and that it is without regard to enumeration or census of the states. I don't know the exact wording of it, but that's pretty darn close. In other words, they're going to charge you a certain amount of money against your income. It has nothing to do with, well, this state has more people, so they have to pay more, or they have to pay us. Every state has to pay a certain portion of the income that their residents make. It's not set up that way. It has nothing to do with how big the state is, or how many people they have, or how many of them work and don't work. It is based on the income of a person. Now, the IRS says that we need to file an income tax return on 15 April every year. There is nothing in the 16th Amendment that says that the federal government may charge an income tax, and every citizen must file an income tax return, and it must be filed by April 15th, or they are in violation and could pay penalties, including penalties for tax evasion, which could result in jail. That is totally set by the administrative agency, the Internal Revenue Service. We have a Health and Human Services Department, and they told us a few years ago we had to wear a mask, vaccinate our children, and they also said that a doctor has to accept Medicaid payments at a set level. So they can't say, I'm sorry, I don't take, I will see you, you're a Medicaid patient, but instead of the flat fee of $50 for a doctor's visit, I'm going to charge $95. You owe me the other $45. The administrative law set by Department of Health and Human Services says this is what you will accept if you're going to accept that type of insurance. And in the case of the pandemic, they told us where we had to wear a mask. There is nothing in the law that says that. It was an administrative law that did it. That is where, in my opinion, private security is going wrong, and why it is not taking it seriously as a professional field sometimes. And why is that? Because other than the labor laws that apply to you, whether you work for Microsoft, Google, or Dunkin' Donuts, wage and hour laws, there are no specific federal regulations around private security. There are none. The federal government stands silent on private security who may identify themselves as a private security company, who may identify themselves as a professional security consultant. There are no federal laws. Now, states are required, not required, but most of them do regulate the private security industry, and they assign a department to do that. Just like any other function, right? There's a department that oversees licensed electricians in the state, right? And there's a good reason for it. People, if they're out working on electricity, they get others hurt or burn down places because they're not professional electricians. But states will do it. In some states, it is the state police that regulate private security. In others, it is, I have seen it in some places, consumer affairs, which also regulates the elevator repair people. It's just a occupational type thing. Some counties and some cities have licensing and formal training requirements. St. Louis County is a great one in Missouri. They have very high standards to be a security officer. Well, I won't say high standards, but they have very strict standards. You must get a guard card, and you have to do certain things. Pennsylvania has some of those as well, in some cities especially. But most, they don't do very much to regulate the industry. In my own home state of Michigan, I know that there were, I think at last count, over 100,000 security officers. We're talking about security guards, right, at that level in the state operating, and there were 2 people assigned to regulate those 100,000 people. So each state generally has some regulation as to who can be a security guard. And these are the 4 things that I found that are in common across I will say the vast majority, not all, by the way. There were some in here that a high school diploma was not required. But generally speaking, 18 years of age, no violent or felony convictions, be of sound mind, and have a GED or high school diploma are the only 4 things you need to work in the security field. That's it. And the part about sound mind may make you laugh, but it can be simply a question on an application that says, have you ever been confined to a facility due to mental illness, and do you consider yourself to be of sound mind? I will submit to you that Charles Manson had not been committed, and he would have considered himself of sound mind, and I think he's still alive, actually. If he's not, he died within the last few years, but certainly in interviews considers himself to be of sound mind now and always has. So that's kind of a, okay, tick the box kind of thing. But those others, that's it across the states. Now, some places do it a little better than others. In Florida, you have to obtain a Class D security guard license. Okay, that's 40 hours of security guard training at a program that's accredited by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. How security isn't part of the state police venue, but part of agriculture, you got me. I'll just go with it. But you are required to have a minimum of 40 hours of training in a program that's approved by the state. In Arkansas, okay, you just have to be hired and trained by a security company or employer seeking your services as a security guard. So in other words, the training can be, this is the way to the men's room and the ladies' room, and make sure you're here on time. Your training is complete. There is no written training. There is no level of training at all in Arkansas. Now, in District of Columbia, requires people working as security guard to undergo a state-approved or district-approved, in this case, security guard training program and earn a passing score on a state-written examination. If this is done properly, you at least have some level of assurance the person is literate and somewhat able to do that, has some level of training. And I think that DC does that simply because private security is used in an awful lot of government buildings. And absent a standard, if they went with the Arkansas standard, I think that the federal government would reject that idea because they have such control over the district, even though it is not part of the federal government. Now, as we move across the country and look at this issue, Idaho requires no licensing or certification requirements in order to gain employment as an unarmed security guard. So in Idaho, Although they do say, I believe, 18 years of age, and I just believe that is because of the general U.S. labor laws. You can work at 16, but I think they require 18 for the type of hours they want to get out of these people, right? But there are no other certifications. You don't need to attest to being of sound mind. You don't need to have a high school education. You don't need to be able to read or write. There are no physical requirements at all. Idaho, if you want to work as a security, if you want to move to Idaho and you say, I don't know what I'm going to do for a job out there, just know that no matter who you are, you're qualified to be a security guard out there. But in Kansas, you have to have a security guard license. It's governed by the state attorney general's office. And you must complete a 32-hour security officer training program. That program is given in certain areas of the state. They have now switched it to online since the pandemic, and I think they're talking about switching that back. But I will say that several times facilities I had in Kansas were visited by regulators. It's just a licensing regulator. It had nothing to do with security. They were looking for licenses for electricians and plumbers we had working, and pipe fitters that needed to be, high pressure people who needed to be certified and licensed. At the same time, they were asking every guard for their guard card, their guard license. If they didn't have it in their possession, the company would be fined. And in Montana, they actually have a board of private security, and you have to get a license from that board of private security. But from what I understand, having spoken with people in Montana, the board of private security allows private security companies to keep a stack of those licenses at their facility and to issue them to people when they hire them. So essentially, yes, you have to have a state-issued security guard license, but if you go to work for a security guard company, they can issue you that license on day one. They just need to send a copy of it in with of course, the application fee. There's always a fee back to the state of Montana, and we're all good and happy. Meanwhile, here in the great state of Pennsylvania, you have to have a license to work as an unarmed security guard in the state, and your employer must petition the courts for a security guard license. And it's considered among the most complicated licensing processes of all the states, but it is not by far the most stringent. So when they say petition the court, a security guard firm has 60 days from the time they hire someone to petition the court for that guard license. They are a provisional hire before that. And they just, every 60 days, they take the stack of forms they filled out from every guard company, and they take them before a judge. And the judge said, why is there a stack of, 2,000 forms sitting on my bench? And the state attorney says these are applications for security guard licenses. They've been registered in the system, and they've all been issued by licensed security companies. And the judge says, very good, summary motion, boom, those are all accepted. These people are now licensed security guards. There is not a one-on, take a look at each one of them to see who these people are, to make sure they are not bad people. The security guard company simply attests to that. That works, and then until it doesn't. And I will tell you that I have had security guards who worked for me who was later found had a criminal record and had to be relieved of duty immediately. And I would venture to say that in Pennsylvania, the same thing is happening. Once these papers all get entered into the system, which takes a long time, right? Somebody's doing data entry. This is not a automated process anywhere yet, right? Because these are hand forms. They then will go through a NCIC check of criminal history in the state of Pennsylvania. And if they have any felony convictions, then they will be pulled and their license will be revoked. But otherwise, it's a complicated process, but it is not a comprehensive process. So all of these different laws, none of them are really all that good or stringent. Workarounds for every single one of them in all the 50 states, and the federal government stands silent on an industry that has 800,000 employees in the U.S. So let me ask you this, okay? Oh yeah, variety is the spice of life. I say that tongue in cheek. But if you are an employee of a large company, okay, let's say, there's a lot of computer science people in here, and even the Homeland and Corporate Security students wouldn't mind going to work for Google. they've got a really good security department. You want to work for Google, okay? And Google has a facility in California, right? Mountain View, California. And they have a facility in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I know that because I've been in both of those facilities. Their headquarters in Mountain View. And in California, it requires a license and a background check and a criminal history and at least 40 hours of training to be a security guard. But in Michigan, it only requires a background check and training by your security company provider that can be in any form, and you're good to go. Now, you're an employee. Should an employee of Google be better protected in one place than another simply because the law says the security guard doesn't have to be as professional? The person tasked with protecting you, the person tasked with locking the doors if an active shooter comes in, the person tasked with pulling the alarm when something goes wrong, like a severe weather event, right? The person tasked with, all kinds of things. If they don't have the same training in those two places, would you say it is fair to employees of that same company that they are protected differently depending on where they sit in the country? My answer to that is absolutely not. If I have a company that provides security for me, I expect that security to be the same in all locations, at least at the same level, and then it may be stepped up based on the other assets besides me in the building, besides people, but it should never go below a certain level if we're protecting people, and people deserve that same level of protection no matter where in the company they sit. So we are problem solvers. It's what we've proven we are, because for people who don't know a lot about mitigations, I mean, that's the part that's kind of missing in our discussions. I'm asking you to mitigate and to use technology and things that you may not be aware of that are available to security professionals. If you go further in this program, you will learn some of those things, and it may surprise you about how good things can be and what is available as far as the tools to mitigate. But you are problem solvers, and this week coming up on Monday, we will become the administrative body responsible for private security in the entire U.S. You are so deputized. Congratulations. And you're going to decide what should be the basic requirements and which are the responsibility of the individual, which are the responsibilities of the employer, and actually which are responsibilities of the government. And then we're going to talk about, how does this have an impact on cost? And is the juice worth the squeeze? And will customers pay for it? And then talk about venues that require more than just the minimum. Is this a tiered kind of thing? Or is this a single level, and then when you get to a certain venue, you need more training with that venue, and that becomes something that is done on the job outside of the venue, outside of the purview, again, of the administrative body, that is you. So you guys are going to do this, and you're going to come up with a plan that we could present to the federal government to say, this is how security should be regulated in the U.S. Because darn it, we've taken one class in this. We've been doing this for 13 weeks. We are indeed security experts, and you can't tell us that we're not because you don't have a definition for it. So on Monday, we're going to break into teams. We're going to outline a reasonable requirements list. What's required for you to just be a security guard? We're going to outline a reasonable training list. We're going to talk about a process to facilitate this plan, because it just doesn't, you just can't wave your magic wand and say, okay, this is going to happen. If we're going to do training, how are we going to do training, right? What's your administrative agency? You can't just say training's required. Well, who's going to do it? Is it the state? Is it the employer? Is it done in a place off the employer's premises? Is it done online? How is this training done? If you decide training needs to be done at all, or some other, background checks. Who does the background check? To what standard? What level? Are there physical requirements for a security guard? It can be physically demanding depending on the venue. So how do you account for that? And then we'll discuss compliance and enforcement. Once you get this plan in place and you say, we, the United States Private Security Administration, say this is what you're going to do, you can't just say on 3 break and hope it happens. Because if you think about it, the IRS certainly has an enforcement arm, as does the DEA for drug enforcement when it's in legitimate drugs, right? In pharmaceuticals, the FDA regulates food drugs, right? You have all these different regulatory agencies, they all have enforcement arms. How are you going to enforce and make sure people comply with this, or they just don't say, yeah, well, since nobody's checking, so be it. We don't need to do those things. Monday's exercise is going to be, it'll carry over to Wednesday when we really have some discussion as well, because I want you to make your plans on Monday, and then Wednesday we're going to get right into it. Participation is key. And I say that because we have a number of people who are just quiet, but I want you to participate. It doesn't mean you have to yell and scream, but I want you to make your position known. What you think matters, because realistically, if only one person puts down their thoughts, we don't have a plan, because we all know that better decisions come from more people participating. It just is true. There's no way around that. The studies have been done, they're in, and you can't argue with the fact that the more input you have, the better your decisions are. And you have to be able to defend your plan, right? Once you tell us what your plan is, this is what we're going to do, be prepared to defend it, because there'll be some people who think, maybe what you're asking for is too much or not enough, or there could be holes in the boat. And all groups will report out. Most will be next Wednesday, but all groups will report out. And those who report early, volunteer to go early, they're going to be given more latitude, right, for error and prep, because as we have discussions about one group's plan, if we find some errors in their plan or some things that might need to be tweaked, I am sure that the other groups will be making those changes on the fly with theirs. The last group that goes should have the best plan, because they've had the advantage of listening to 8 other groups. So in the grading, latitude will be given to those who go early. So think about whether you want your group to go early or whether you want to go late and almost ensure perfection. So with that, this is a short lecture this week. It's only 36 minutes, and you have no homework to do. There's no quiz. There's no discussion board. There's nothing to prepare for other than what you just did, so that you're ready for Monday. I want you to give it a bit of a think when you've got nothing to do, right? Because, of course, at the end of a school year, in the spring semester, everybody has nothing to do. But just give it a bit of a think about how you might want to attack this and what you might want to bring to your group. And with that, have a wonderful week. I will see you in person next week, and we will get right into it and solve this major problem.